And I think we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the sewer system. And we'll go back to Mr. Cathcart.
Hello, thank you very much.
I don't see any attendees raising their hands with questions. So I just need to make a note that I don't see anybody stepping to the virtual microphone, so to speak. So we can move on.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Again, Alan Cathcart. I am now the Director of Public Works. You know me for the past 23 years as the Water Sewer Superintendent. With that said, I'm going to request, and I've done this in the past at this hearing, if I can present the water fund first, and that 95% of the community is affected directly from that, and it sort of sets the table on the wastewater and help. Hopefully, it kind of makes the.
I have no objection to that request. So, anybody else object to the slight reordering of the agenda? Carry on.
Oh, excuse me. Wrong slide. Hold on. I have them both open. I'm sorry. Okay. Can you see? I'm going to. Oh.
If you have two windows open, you have to select the window that
you see. Are you able to see it now?
No, we're seeing sewer.
Okay, I will. Let me go back to share. Select water. Share.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so this article, in essence, authorizes the funding of the town water system for the next year through the use of user fees and other department income.
Alan, I'm sorry, if you could just switch your presenter view.
You switch out of that view. We're seeing your text.
Oh, you're seeing? Okay,
yeah, we're seeing
fair enough.
The whole thing.
Let me stop share. Me 1 second, I apologize. We had practiced this earlier and it seemed to work fine. I apologize. Water view.
Nice backdrop.
Yeah, slideshow. Presenter view. It should be. Now go back. Share screen. And do you see the presenter view again? Or can you see the, what do you see now?
Alan, when you just did that last click is when it went to the dual screen thing again. So the last step that you did, you need to undo.
Okay.
Although,
There it is.
Yeah, that looks better.
Although unfortunately it has my notes on the other. Chris, can you try that and see if you can get me to where? I'm just hoping, is that still showing?
It's showing your notes.
It's okay.
Mr. Cathcart, if we look at your notes, we're not going to hold it against you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So basically,
very interesting notes, actually.
yes. So in essence, you know, the real issue that I'm kind of fascinated with in the spring of 2000, when the country was going through the change into, you know, the past 100 years, some of the top events that were reviewed through, you know, the planning departments of the world was, in essence, number one important component was the provision of pure water and effective sewage treatment. I think it's very important because it really highlighted the fact that a lot of communities sort of evolved and developed around of having effective and quality drinking water, but also on the wastewater treatment. It's kind of fascinating that one of the significant advents of clean water and actually wastewater treatment was the fact that I'm kind of familiar with typhoid, dysentery. These were serious problems, over 100 years ago, and it's kind of fascinating. We're revisiting this phenomenon. But one thing I'd like to sort of make comment on is that the essential services that water sewer provide through whatever pandemic, it has to be reliable, it has to be consistent, and I think everybody in Concord would appreciate and recognize that through this the past few months, we really haven't had to worry about fortunately this essential service. So it really highlights really why I got into the industry, and kind of appreciate the fact that the importance of investment and reliable and consistent service. When we look at the program objectives on the water side, we look at the regulatory statutory requirements. We look at customer satisfaction. We look at sufficient supply today and in the future. And a lot of what our budget forecasting is designed to do, as well as the rate setting, is to understand not just where we are today, but where we're going to be in 10 years. When we talk about the regulatory statutory requirements, they drive a lot of our costs. We have the surface water treatment rule, which is a major component of where we're going in our capital plan. We have lead and copper rules, which deal with the corrosivity of water and the fact we have old infrastructure and pipes in the system that we're trying to work on removing. We have disinfection byproducts. We have the Water Management Act, and that's a very important regulatory framework of how we and what we're enabled to withdraw as far as within Concord as well as at NAGOG. And that sets a lot of requirements and conditions on how we operate. We also have the obligation to maintain and operate your system. And in essence, that's basically, we spend a lot of our time and resources doing that. And we do consider it Concord's system. We're here as the stewards. We try to maintain reasonable competitive rates, and we'll sort of walk through a little bit on that. And as far as hiring, retaining, and training professional workforce, the workforce today is very different than it was 20 years ago, and it probably won't look exactly like this in the next 10 years because of all the various drivers that we tried to do to sort of enhance and improve, our services. With that said, the infrastructure, the assets, at $24 million, it's a fairly complex system. I've mentioned this in the past. We don't have just one treatment facility or one source of supply. We have a mix of groundwater supplies where you can see we have 6 different sources in different parts of the town. We have NAGOG water up in on the border of Acton and Littleton. We have a number of pumping stations. We have water treatment, presently over at the Deaconess facility. It's what we anticipate, putting in place up at NAGOG. We have 2 large storage reservoirs. One of them is in significant need of refurbishment. We have over 134 miles of distribution main. That's the pipes that range from a diameter of 8-inch to 16-inch. And they feed not just drinking water, but fire protection for the community, where you see we have over 1,300 hydrants that we maintain and keep operable in the event of emergencies. As far as our capital plan, you can see it's fairly robust. I think the narrative here, and most importantly, is we have a lot of investment that we have anticipated in putting towards NAGOG Pond. Again, it's a unfiltered surface water system that has been in the planning stages for treatment for over 2 decades. We decided to move forward with this. We had a sufficient, what we thought at the time, reserve, and we got approval for some borrowing. at a town meeting a few years ago to fund this. It's the most significant investment we have to make in our system in the next 10 to 20 years. And this coming year, we were looking to realize the construction. We phased this project of intake, a replacement of a 1909 age cast pipe that goes out over 1,800 feet into Nagog Pond. That is planned to be replaced. We're hoping to have it begin in the fall. We have the treatment facility itself is we're completing design of the full-scale facility and looking for some monies to start the construction, dependent upon permitting and working with the state and the town of Acton on that. We have some funds available for emerging contaminants. There are sort of contaminants of interest that we are aware of in the industry. They're called PFAS or polyfluorinated alkyl compounds. The entry is presently, there's regulatory review of some standards the state may be looking at imposing over the next year. We're trying to make sure we have monies and funds available if necessary. And we also have routine investment on an annual basis into the water main replacement. And you can see the value we have for 21 actually complements the money that we anticipate spending this fiscal year. However, with the COVID situation, there has been a bit of a delay on when that may start up, but we do anticipate doing work in the Peter Spring Road area this coming construction season. We also, I'll go back, have some funds available for the meter reading upgrade, depending upon, we want to complement any work that the municipal light plant may do so that we have funds to partner and be efficient with that particular program. As far as our operating and maintenance plan, you can see it's just about $5 million in total. Most of those costs are for the pumping, treatment, distribution maintenance. We do put a significant level of depreciation into our facilities, and the question became up, earlier with the light plan as far as what's the basis of that depreciation. We do have depreciation schedules for our various assets, whether it's pumping equipment or pipes themselves. But we work with the finance department on sort of establishing what the appropriate value should be. And while we don't do a pilot, we do contribute to the general fund on an annual basis because we get a lot of support from other departments and services within the town, and whereas we are designed to operate like a business and make sure we cover the full costs, without the support of the taxes, we do have a significant contribution that goes towards other departments. Here's a breakdown where you can see sort of where our O&M expenditures go. It rolls into our rates. In fact, I would sort of mention, and we'll probably get into it with some questions, discussion. But if you have the budget book in front of you, I would urge you look at page 64. And really that's sort of the master plan of our revenues, expenditures, and rates all sort of get folded into this. And it's a 10-year pro forma. I'm proud to say we're one of the few water systems I know that have one like this. It was a tool that was developed over 20 years ago, and it really has helped chart our course as far as knowing where our significant expenditures are going to occur, what the appropriate rate structure should be to realize, not just next year or 5 years, but really 10 years out. And it sort of captures all of those significant capital improvements that we can anticipate. It rolls into the rates. And I just want to volunteer that while we haven't had a rate hearing yet, it's all been part of this, the challenge of the schedule with COVID. But generally, we would have had this FinCom hearing earlier. We would have gone through town meeting, and then we go to the Public Works Commission, who is the rate setting authority to review the proposed rate adjustments. We're looking for the water side to go up about $25 a year. The typical water customer will spend somewhere, this chart's a little backdated because we don't have data from other systems. This is to compare Concord versus Bedford, Lexington, Wellesley, and you can see Concord in here. Our average rate is about $533, I believe. It's in the notes per customer, but that's average. We also recognize that we have a conservation-based rate structure, a three structure that impacts both residents and commercial customers. But the intent is that we believe everybody is entitled to a base level of service that we maintain a fairly, sort of a very competitive cost. And if they need more water for interests such as outdoor use or larger pools or something like that, they would then pay more per unit for that, what we would call sort of more of a premium service. And that actually does help offset some of the impact of the base rate for those who are on fixed income and may not be able to afford that. Our customer profile, you can see here, is primarily residential. We do have mixed use with commercial customers. We have some regional facilities, both MCI.
Alan, you're cutting out for me. I don't know whether that's a general problem.
Me too.
These public buildings have a competitive rate in that we can interrupt their service if and when we need to during the summer, when we typically have our peak demands. And that's one of the incentives of the conservation-based rate, is to reduce the summer peak demand, which really drives costs as far as the amount of resources we have available, the all groundwater supplies, NAGOG. They're generally used during the summer, and there's very little freeboard as far as room for failure or mechanical problems. When we go out and look at the surveys in town that are performed every 2 years, we see that for the most part, people are very pleased with the level of service that's provided. I think it's over 95%, consider it, good or excellent, which is, a great thing. Equally, and again, just to go back, we trend that over time just to see, are we missing something? Are there any upsets? But this is very helpful as far as seeing how we've done over the past, since FY13 through FY19. And then you can see as far as our, price sensitivity to the customers, you can see that majority believe it is reasonably priced. I think that's all we can ask for. There is a cost for water. People have been realizing that over the last 20 years, that there's cost to operate the system, and for the regulatory and water quality purposes, we do need to make the investment. So with that said, I'd argue many of the people who believe are excessively priced are probably those that are using more of the premium water or, the third step in the summer. And it can be fairly costly. We have customers who will spend thousands of dollars a year, with most of it, during the summer. But it is something, a service we provide. There's lots of state policies that are becoming more and more stringent as far as providing flexibility to do so. But we believe the price signal and some of our conservation initiatives have helped. And I will say one metric the state uses that we have conformed with is a residential gallon per day per capita rate. It's how much is assigned to every resident, what's your daily use. And the state has a benchmark of 65. And I think we were slightly under that on average for our customers. So we think the conservation works. We still work hard to, kind of create that message and those incentives. But I believe that sort of walks us through at least the overview, and then we can kind of answer some questions you might have on some of the specifics. So with that said, I also have, because this is a team effort, Bob Hill, who is the management analyst for the water sewer division, is on the line. If there's some questions I can't handle, and he might be able to sort of assist. And Paul Reinhardt as well, who's been working closely with the townhouse and the finance group on putting together the budget book. So that's the overview, and I'm pleased to take questions as you have them.
Chris.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was very clear. I have a couple of questions on the large spending that's coming up, focused on NAGOG, and it looks like from your 10-year pro forma that happens all in FY. I was looking to see if I get this right here. It's mostly in 22 and 23. Is that correct? It looks like it's about 26, 27 million in spending.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So two questions. One, that's a dramatic increase, right? These are 2 huge years of spending. How will your organization manage that much in capital projecting over a 2-year period? Are you going to be using your own employees? Are you going to outsource? So that's question one. Question two, how does that hit the ratepayers, right? So is there going to be a big spike in bills as debt service comes in? What do you project, I guess, for the rate growth in 2025, 26, et cetera?
Thank you very much for the question, because I'm going to answer some, and it's going to dovetail into the wastewater as well. But how do we manage these projects? And the reality is, in this industry, we see more and more of these sorts of very technical upgrades. We've been it's not just the construction, the permitting of these projects can be Herculean. In fact, the permitting of NAGOG has been a process that's taken over 5 years. It's involved almost every level at the state, involving DEP. It's included archaeological review. It's included working through other towns, acting specifically on site plan reviews and permitting and conservation commission activities. A lot of effort. I cannot believe the amount of effort that takes for permitting alone. We go into the design, which is also very expensive. We're talking about a $20 million initiative at this point, with design costs of millions of dollars to get the design proper. We've been working with environmental partners on that. Because of the size of this project, we are by law required to have an owner project manager. That's an independent contractor who reviews with staff the design team, which is environmental partners. We have an owner project manager that we've hired from Weston and Sampson, who works closely with staff to make sure the design's what we're after, the efficiencies are built in, there's value engineering included in that. The challenge we have in Acton is the site and constraints that we've had have been really challenging. And so there's been significant increase in costs, literally based on the land area we have to work with and some of the constraints that have been imposed through both the state and local permitting process. But in-house, I'd like to say and give credit to some of the staff we have someone who's an operations manager within the water sewer division who we pulled from the private industry. She used to work for a private consulting company doing project management. So we have, that's sort of the staffing I was talking about earlier. Having that capability in-house is huge because the costs are so great for some of these improvements. And she is not only helping in the NAGOG design and participate in the construction, she's been instrumental in the wastewater pump station improvements. And because the threshold is a lot less, that's about $2 million a project. She is actually serving as the owner project manager for the town, which is fantastic. She works very closely with our operations group who know what they need. They're kind of the hands-on group. So we're very fortunate for, strategically, we have these people in place to help us. But your point is dead on, that there's a lot of risk if you don't do this properly. And so there's lots of layers of fiduciary protection to make sure we're doing the right thing. The challenge we've had with this particular project, and it dips into your question on our fund balance and how robust it may appear, we knew there was some uncertainty a few years ago. We knew we were contributing and putting into the reserve fund what we thought was more than sufficient, along with the borrowing authorization we had a few years, to complete this project, but the completion would have been by now. And because of permitting delays, we are a few years down the road with new constraints have been imposed, and we've seen the costs inflate. So that's to look at that reserve fund as some buffer, but it's likely we're going to have to come back to town meeting when we're done with the final design to make sure we have sufficient funds. It would be something we'd be looking at, sort of additional borrowing to actually complete this project. So, to answer the staffing and oversight, that's what we have. But as far as the fund balance, it speaks to the challenge we have in this industry of, construction costs we see have escalated over 25-30% per year over the last 3 years. And that we've seen and heard talking to other systems that is not unusual. And now with COVID, there is a reality that it may be an adjustment. We don't know if it's going to be up or down, but we are hoping that if we're poised and we have the design and the environment is favorable, that we may do better than what we're anticipating or projected literally just a few months ago. But that's the kind of variability that we're looking at and some of the challenges we have to try and meet the target of when we're ready to spend the money, what's the industry look like, and that's a challenge. But thank you for the question.
So that fund would be designated, or you would use it to help with the NAGOG.
It's drawn down, yes.
Yeah. Do you? You don't fund depreciation then, unlike utility group that we just spoke to. They actually have fund balance that they've put aside for depreciation. You don't. It looks like.
We have depreciation in our. We do depreciate a certain amount.
Right, but you don't fund it. You don't put money aside to pay for the new stuff you're going to have to buy.
Christine?
Yeah?
Yes, we do fund depreciation in all of our enterprise funds.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. So why doesn't it show up in the fund balance for water, Carrie?
I'm sorry, I just stepped away from the meeting for a minute and I just came back. So
okay. Well, if you take a look at the balance sheet for that they attach in the appendix, there's no restricted for capital improvements, which I think is where depreciation goes if you're funding it. That's all right. Okay. So my other question, Alan, is the revenue. So what will happen to rates?
Right.
As in 2025, how big a hit is it going to be? Okay.
So again, when you go to page 64, that's that 10-year plan. That incorporates revenue projections over, I think it's the next 3 to 4 years of 5% increase, dropping down to 4% afterwards. And it's exactly why, the power of that pro forma is we intend not to have rate shock. I've been talking to other systems recently that they're looking at potentially 15% rate increases to react to capital improvements. And they don't have the good fortune of really projecting where their costs are going to be. So the answer is 5%, although we set them year to year. We are hoping to keep the increase to 5% or less over the next 10 years. And we see that, I think it's 3 years of 5% increases, which would be adjusted based on what we find the real costs are for NAGOG.
And how would that compare to the last 5 years? So is that much higher?
Not much higher. No, I think when I first got here in 1997, there may have been a significant rate increase, like a 15%. It was really significant, but we didn't have a plan before that. And so the former director put together this capital plan, 10-year pro forma, and we realized we were way off. So we do not envision anything like that. And that's the value and power of that pro forma.
Yes, it is. Capital plans are really good. I really like them. I'm a big fan of that, not just for the water group, for the town. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes,
So
me too.
so what you're telling me is that part of the revenue that you'll start to earn in 2021 will be in excess of expense, and that will also create reserves that will fund the future. So you're creating a stabilization reserve for rates.
Correct.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Phil Swain has his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Alan. Thank you.
Hi.
What about the status of the litigation out at Nagog Pond? Is that concluded? Is there a chance for an appeal? And where does that stand? If you could summarize that.
So Phil's describing the fact that as we were in the permitting process and design of Nagog, the town of Littleton was challenging Concord's rights to the water. And they were sort of pointing towards legislation from 1884, an act, which if we simply had no other laws or rules, might apply. In the 80s, the state decided it needed to manage the water resources of the Commonwealth holistically, so they didn't have turf wars and challenges, much like what we're seeing. And so they registered various supplies. And Concord has made the case that from the 1980s, we have been, in over 100 years, we've been relying on Nagog as a critical resource. Littleton challenged it, or were planning on challenging it. So we ended up sort of taking this to land court to see if they would not review whether it was the statute of 1884 or the Water Management Act that really dictated authority and control of the resource. Land court voted last year in favor of Concord's position. We felt, strongly that we were, in the right. Littleton, I will have to say, Acton also participated in joined forces with Littleton because they had some vested interest. If there was a resource to be had, they thought they should be entitled to it. And the original legislation did call out Acton and Littleton's rights. But we prevailed, and Littleton and Acton are now appealing this. It was going to go to the land court, and we all agreed that it might be better if it went to the SJC directly. It's a very interesting case. We think Concord has very a good standing, but it's litigation that hasn't been realized in the Commonwealth, and it may have implications as far as the entire Water Management Act and how other communities are managed. But so Phil, it is presently under appeal, the decision from land court, which was in Concord's favor.
Okay, thank you.
Dee.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
I'm doing well, Dee. How are you?
Good. I have a couple questions. When Nagog is finished, do you think you will have an adequate supply for our future population?
Nagog is the adequate supply for our future population. Without it, we're at more risk. The reason is Nagog has a potential yield of, it's about 1 million gallons a day of reliable water. We don't have any other source of supply that's close to that. We have some that are close to 500,000 gallons, but it's sort of a portfolio of smaller sources that are routinely challenged or compromised with cleaning and maintenance issues. We'll end up having to replace some of these wells just because based on the wear and tear of them. And Nagog really provides us with the ability to optimized treatment. And without it, we're at significant risk. And we've demonstrated this, and we'll probably do it again as far as, slides, with NAGOG, without. But we need to have the ability during the summer to operate without one large supplies online. That will happen. And when it's happened in the last few years, because we haven't been able to draw on NAGOG the way we really need to, it becomes a fire drill that most people don't see, but our operators realize of, an emergency. How can we get a pump, company in? How do we replace a VFD that's failed? We don't really have the resiliency that we need. And when we do get NAGOG online and it's able to produce up to 1.5 million gallons in a day, we can rest groundwater wells. We can look more holistically at our system and manage it as opposed to just operating whatever is available. And managing means considering environmental impacts, considering water quality, a host of benefits once we can manage the system.
Okay, a couple other quick questions. You were talking about the emerging contaminants. How much has that shifted in the past? Like when you were starting this so many years ago out at NAGOG, how much has that shifted now and the financial impact?
It's dramatic, but it's not just NAGOG, and we haven't really seen the next shoe drop on this. But when we talk about these contaminants of interest right now, we're talking about measurements of these compounds that take us into parts per trillion. I mean, this is most people are familiar with milligrams per liter, parts per million. At one point in time, they started getting into volatile organics were concerned, parts per billion. Well, these compounds have an interest in, through society. It's not just in the water supply, of parts per trillion. And these are things that we've only just starting to establish the methodology to measure. And, at the turn of the century, when we talked about pure water, they talked about water that was clear and chlorinated. And today, it's a very different beast. And that drives a lot of the cost of production because it's not just pumping from the ground, it's pumping and treating to various levels depending on the source water quality. And NAGOG is a very well-protected resource.
Okay.
It's well protected because Concord's invested money over hundreds of years to own lots of land around it to ensure we didn't have development that could impinge that quality.
Thank you. One other quick question, which is private wells. Has there been any action on categorizing them or identifying them throughout the town? The use of private wells for gardening and et cetera.
There is an interest, and it's not just, I think Concord should be interested in all of the water resources, including private wells, including ponds, rivers, stormwater, groundwater, surface water, where the public works is going to take a leadership role, as far as I'm concerned, to try and integrate all of these things. And because right now it's done piecemeal and it's not very efficient. And when we're talking about private wells, they do withdraw from the same resources as the town in some cases. We know this. It's no surprise the Concord Country Club has a permit for a well very close to our Deaconess well, and we need to manage and protect. So, those people with private wells, there's about 5% that rely on it for drinking water purposes. As I mentioned earlier, 95% of our community is served with municipal water. So some need it for potable purposes, and there are more and more wells that have been installed for irrigation and outdoor use. Now, I'm not going to judge.
I missed what percent of our population is on well water?
About 5%.
5%. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And they would require the wells for potable use. There are more wells that people supplement the town water for drinking water, and they use the private wells for outdoor purposes.
Right. Okay, we'd go on forever, so I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions from the committee? I don't see any. I don't see anyone with their hand up from the attendees who are still with us. So I think you can move on to the sewer system.
It's easier said than done, isn't it? Let me try this.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't mind me if I look under my desk because I heard the mouse. See how he's doing.
As Stephen Crane has said, as soon as we get this technology perfected, we'll no longer need it. But let me see. Now I got that. Hold on. Water. Let me I have to get out of this 1 second. See if I can bring sewer. Okay, I should be good here. I promise sewer will be quicker. Okay, are we good?
Great.
Okay. So again, much like the water fund, sewer is an enterprise system where we take we're looking to get authorization to spend a combination of user fees and other special service fees towards our FY21 costs.
Quick question on this. Are your fiscal year for this really calendar? Just to be.
No, it isn't. Our fiscal year is the unlike the light plant, we actually operate from July through the end of June.
You do. Okay.
Yep. And we're also included, and I roll in Article 19, which is the sewer. Let's see, we did sewer. Okay. I'll also touch upon the sewer fund as well in this particular presentation. That is the fund where we collect revenue from expanded use or new uses of people who tie into the municipal sewer system to help offer any of the costs for expansion of system for new users. You're all familiar with the fact that the capacity challenges in Concord on wastewater is pretty significant by regulatory limits on the NIPTES program, but basically a third of the town is sewered. Maybe it's closer to 40% now, mostly in the downtown areas. You can see from this locus map, this is the general location of where the municipal sewer is. And again, as Dee had mentioned, when we talk about water resource management, this has a significant impact on how our resources function. But 2/3 of the town have private septic systems. So as they draw water, from our supply, they may recharge, groundwater, but more into local watersheds. So it's sort of an important concept, to be aware of. But again, only a third of the community is really affected by this particular program. Similar to the water, we're looking at the total assets. We have a value of about $15.3 million. It includes one very advanced wastewater treatment facility off of Bedford Road. It's the discharges directly to the Concord River. So there's certainly implications as far as the quality goes of discharge going into a wild and scenic river. But we do phosphorus reduction, and it is a state-of-the-art facility, and it's been working very well since we did a major upgrade in about 2007-ish. We have two large pumping stations. A lot of sewer is gravity flow from homes, ideally, into gravity pipes that range in diameter from 8-inch to 32-inch. But oftentimes they, because we can't get all gravity to one location, have buried depths of pipes of, tens or, 30, 40 feet, you have lift stations in various parts of town. And I'll sort of get into some of the improvements that we've got slated for the Low Road lift station and the Assabet station by Main Street. Again, the question becomes, do we depreciate? Yes. The depreciation went up significantly after we did the major improvement at the treatment plant in 2007. It's been dropping, but we do have an allowance for depreciation. The treatment plant for our O&M is primarily contract operations. We have Woodard and Curran is coming near the end of a 10-year contract ops agreement with the town. And then you'll see, we have a significant contribution again from the wastewater arena to the general fund, again for the support services, much like Concord, much like the water fund. What's notable is we have very little control. About 71% of our budget is sort of defined through depreciation, treatment plant, contract ops, and the general fund. So the remainder is where we deal with our investments on the pumping collection system that we have. This gives you, this is actually a visual basically showing that. You can see depreciation, general fund, and contract management is the significant pieces of our operating expense, which is somewhere in the order of $3 million. Some of the capital improvements that we have included in our 10-year plan for FY21. You'll see this is the $2.2 million that went towards, is going towards the upgrades at Lowell Road, right on the Keyes Road facility. If you drive by tomorrow, you'll see activities begun. They're mobilizing as we speak. I will say this is a situation where we went out to bid. I think we were 30% more than what our probable cost estimate was at 90%. And that speaks to the industry, as I was talking about, sort of the time of when you get a project out into the market. It was very, very difficult getting contractors. We didn't have a lot of bids on this project, and this is a $2 million project. That may change dramatically very soon, but that's the nature of this, kind of not a luck of the draw, but COVID will have an impact as far as availability and interest, possibly from other contractors. The wastewater treatment plant improvements include, we have about $50,000 of what's the word, security measures that we're putting in over there. We're also doing security upgrades at all our water systems as well. We have an allowance for the meter replacement program to complement the water and light plant. You'll see this investment here, Inflow Infiltration. We have it at about $200,000 a year. That is, I have a slide I'll show you a little bit later, but that's probably going to go up significantly over the next 3 to 5 years once we do a more thorough assessment of all the pipes, the 33 miles of pipes that we have. Much of it is, close to 100 years of age. The improvement, this is the Low Road pump station. The facility is, was last rehabilitated in the 80s. So it's going to be completely refurbished. We're not going to really change the structure at all, but inside is going to be completely gutted. All new electric, all new process controls, SCADA systems, very large horsepower pumps. We pump over 1 million gallons of wastewater, up to 2 million during peak periods through this facility up to the treatment plant. So that's where the preponderance of our capital monies are going to be going towards this station. And then the Assabet, similar, that's over in West Concord. But interesting, all the Assabet water gets pumped to this facility that then gets pumped to the treatment plant. The inflow infiltration is something that we have we're developing a plan. We submitted to Mass DEP just last year for their review through the federal National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits. EPA and DEP are getting more aggressive with requiring communities to do more to remove, in essence, groundwater or roof drains, stormwater from entering the collection system, predominantly because we then end up adding chemicals, treating it, and discharging as part of and mixing it with other waste. So we're putting a lot of money into the elimination of this, both in the right-of-way and the pipes. And then as we have a program where anytime a home is redone or significant investment made, we're having the owners be responsible for inspection and replacement of the laterals. These are the private services that go to them, because that is generally a very challenging source of infiltration that most communities can't get a good handle of. And we've taken advantage of all the investments and investments of sort of gutting old homes and building beautiful homes. Well, you need the infrastructure, including water and wastewater, to support it. So that program has really helped and reduce. I will say we have talked about the challenge of maintaining our not exceeding our permit capacity, the 1.2 million gallons a day at the wastewater treatment plant. Mm-hmm. We have done it very judiciously, managed to have some economic growth and development without exceeding the permit. And if we exceed the permit, we really are opening ourselves up to all sorts of new requirements that could be imposed on the town. So we've done a good job. The Public Works Commission has worked very aggressively to manage that. And we're pleased to date. We've been able to accommodate some of the economic growth development while not exceeding our discharge permit. Sewer rates. It is more expensive to collect and treat wastewater than drinking water. As I mentioned, drinking water is about $530 a year on average. The sewer is up. I don't know. I may even have it. Yes, $713. So it's a little bit more on for the sewer fees. I will say that the increase we're proposing, because we have a fairly healthy fund balance, is only 2% on the sewer users. That's about $14 a year for those customers. We also have a special assessment where very few systems do this, and it takes a lot of administration, but I think it's the fairest way, where we base sewer use on your winter water demand, so as not to inflate it with outdoor water use. And so we actually have an adjustment we make, so it's prorated over the course of a year, so as not to penalize someone for the very high water use during the summer in this fund. That's just not the way that we're trying to keep the enterprises separate. You can see comparison rates with our neighbors, Bedford, Lexington, Wellesley, and you can see Concord is very competitive. And I think when we get the opinion of our service from, most people don't think a lot about their wastewater until it fails. So, reasonably priced is good. I guess I don't have opinion of, I don't have the opinion of service. I'm missing that slide, sorry. So I will say, just to complement, the Sewer Improvement Fund, again, is a separate dedicated fund. That's where we collect money for new or expanded uses. And that's to offset the cost for having to expand our treatment facility. And I think we've talked, I've been working with a new town manager and staff within Public Works to try and figure out how we can be a little bit more creative with, using these funds to potentially get more capacity at the wastewater treatment plant, and possibly dovetail that with some integrated water resource management planning to make it worthwhile, including potential stormwater as well. So I think that's basically that's the explanation of the genesis of the sewer improvement fee. I can go into it more detail if you like. Otherwise, I'm here to answer any questions you have on the wastewater.
one quick question. Alan, who pays for the cost of a faulty lateral? Is it the homeowner or the town?
The homeowner.
Okay.
Yes.
When you go along and put in new pipes and there's a connection there, if they want to change it, they pay for it, correct?
Yes, right now on the both on water fund and sewer, it's worth knowing this. It's good for people in Concord to understand this. If we do a major improvement, a water main replacement, like we're proposing over in Peter Spring Road neighborhood, in that whole area, when we install new water main, there's no sewer there. We will install the main and the lateral to the property line at that point.
Right. Okay.
And then the owners will be responsible from the property line in. After 50 years or so of service, if they do a major improvement to their home, we would not be back replacing the water main. And at that point, we would have them replace the entire lateral, because that's when they're spending money on a fairly pricey home. They're looking for reliable service, and the last thing we need is a problem in the right of way or in their property. Brand new home, everything else is new, and then vital infrastructure is failing them. That's just not a good way to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Alan, it's Wade Rubenstein.
Can you de-share it, Alan, so we can see all the participants?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do you know what the rate of increase has been over time with the sewer improvement fee? And how exactly does that fee get established? I mean, it's increasing greater than the rate of the sewer fee itself.
Okay.
Who sets that?
I wish I could. I'm going to go back to that slide if I can. Might be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right in here. So basically, the fee was initially set back in the 80s when the town went through a sewer facility plan. That's the state of the art. What are the needs of the town on the wastewater side? There was a need to. There was a lot of money through the state and federal agencies to allow for the installation of a advanced wastewater treatment. At that time, the town was very strategic and did not want to. There was what I've heard is the philosophy: if you build it, they will come. They decided not to oversize the system. They did not want to accommodate significant economic growth and development. So since the 80s, we've been living with a treatment facility and permits that have not expanded, despite the fact we've had a couple generations of expansion of the collection system. In 89 is when they passed the article to have this fee established. And it was somewhere in the order of, I don't know, if it's $11, per gallon. It's based on Title V, a daily max flow. In 2004, that was 20 years after, 1984, we went through another, what they called a comprehensive wastewater master plan. It was an exhaustive study, including many boards, a couple years of work to identify where are we going over the next 20 years. And at that point, I believe the fee went up when it realized we are not going to be expanding the facility. EPA is not interested in seeing us increase discharge, to the Concord River. And it went up. There's been a couple increments of increases. It's always been based on what is the anticipated cost to get X gallons of increased capacity to the 1.2 million. So in 2013 was the final iteration. Well, I'm trying to think of what, I don't have them marked here, but Wade, every time it's been evaluated, it looks at what are the capital costs to treat whatever the needs are. We've identified somewhere between 300,000 gallons a day and 500,000 gallons a day of potential additional capacity. And if we were to realize that, it's kind of like once we go over the 1.2, we have to accommodate it with possibly denitrification at the treatment plant. That's a very complex new treatment process. We're looking at a groundwater discharge permit. at that site, which could allow us maybe 150,000 gallons a day of additional capacity. That alone, which over 5 years ago, was over $3 million of probable cost. So right now, I don't know what the cost is. We haven't changed it, but the fee was set to offset those capital improvements to increase the flow. So it's always been based on what's the cost of expanding the facility. And when I say it doesn't go up every year, it's not part of the rate increase. Every so often we have a third-party consultant come in who understands the state-of-the-art technology, understands the cost of expansion. They come up with an assessment that the fee is based on. Our goal and my hope would be to potentially leverage those funds to be a little bit more efficient with maybe increasing the capacity of the treatment plant with modest modifications, potentially set that with some improvements potentially, that are, supplementing stormwater in areas that may need it, may improve quality of stormwater so that we're taking those funds, we're creating capacity, and we're improving the environmental protection of Concord. But that's the long story of the fee being set and kind of what we intend to do with it. But that's in reserve until we need to make those expansions. We are also maintaining our permit by investing some of those fees in the I&I to reduce. When the system was installed, it wasn't intended to be as tight as regulators would like it to be today. So we are actually increasing some capacity by doing things like lining certain sections of pipe so there is no infiltration. But in 1900s, a little bit of dilution was not a problem. When the waste management was very simple, it went to sand beds over at the existing site. And if 50% of it was groundwater, it didn't matter as much. Now 10% matters, and it's making the system tighter. So that's also allowed some of this economic growth and development to occur without putting the rest of the town at risk. That's how we've been able to maintain our permit, I believe, some of that investment into the I&I.
Thank you. I do have a question. A good chunk of your expense is a contract to manage the wastewater facility. What's the contract renewal? How long does the current contract go for, and when are you going to be up for renegotiation?
So I believe we have about a year to a year and a half before we will end up, probably within 6 months, we'll start pulling together potentially an RFP of some sort. We'll probably get a third-party consultant on board who does this, for a living, knows where we might be able to kind of sharpen our proposals. We have to look at all options. We have to look at what town resources do we have? Do we have the sophistication to take it over? It was literally run by the town before I got, this was in 95. I think the town actually had its own operators managing it. It was 95, 96 when they went to contract operation. So we got to evaluate, where is the best value for Concord? Is it to, through a third party? Is it, in-house resources? And how do we make them competitive, based on, it's not just the operations people, but the depth of the technical people who can help with improvements and whatnot. So we'll be looking at that over the next year. And we will be likely, if we go out, you do need to enter into a long-term contract because people they need to invest in staffing. They want to know kind of what improvements they want to make. And the longer the investment, the more likely they're going to manage it properly and not just, run it until it's, falling apart and then hand it back to the town. So that operations manager I spoke about earlier also is involved with any of the capital improvements there. Part of the contract requires them to invest a certain amount of money into that facility. And we work with them to make sure it's prudent.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee?
I have one, Dean.
Okay.
Okay. So going back to the balance sheet again, to the reserves. So you have about 11 million in cash. You have half of that is in your funded depreciation. The other half is unrestricted, and you have about $1 million or so that's for debt service. So how did you end up with $5 million in unrestricted, and how are you going to use it?
Is that over the 10-year period we're talking about?
This is what was there at June 30th of 2019. I don't know what it is today.
Okay.
That's the balance sheet that I have. Yeah.
So
you're going to spend about $10 million in the next 5 years in capital expenditures, and you're not going to borrow. But so I can see why, because you have $11 million in cash. But how did you get there? And what does that say about the profitability in this organization, or the rate schedule that we're using? Are we collecting too much that we end up with a big pile of cash?
we looked at the, again, by plugging into the pro forma, we were trying to ensure that we we have appropriate reserve for the anticipated capital. We ran different values. Last year, we only went up 1% on the sewer. And I think when we project out, we are at 2% over the next 10-year horizon.
Right.
And as I mentioned, as far as the regulatory environment, we do anticipate things will get more aggressive as far as our phosphorus. It could include other compounds. For instance, we talked about these emerging contaminants. Could become something that we end up looking at in our waste stream. So it's part of the uncertainty of where the regulatory environment's driving us. But we do know we're probably going to be spending, as I mentioned on the I&I, we have $200,000. We're kind of looking at that short term. I fully expect that's going to go up to millions of dollars when we identify the needs. And that's where we're going to do liners on 32-inch, collector mains. So that can be spent pretty quickly once we find the problems.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, again, I think it's heavy. If you're your balance is just looking at the cash numbers, right? So You've been around 10 million. As you spend over the next 5 years, based on the pro forma, you go down as low as like 5 million, and then you start coming back up. So, and that's just, so again, some of that is funding depreciation. It may be for debt service. Well, you don't really have any debt service. It's not debt service, but you have a pretty healthy cash balance. So I don't know. I'm going to keep asking that question. What are you using the money for? And are you collecting too much?
Dean, can I?
Yep,
Stephen Green.
sure.
And Chris, the answer is going to keep being the same.
Okay.
The cash balance helps with lowering interest rates, and for emergency purposes, and for flattening rate fluctuations in times where we have either unexpected or planned major infrastructure costs. It's the answer across the board for all reserves, especially with enterprise funds.
Okay, but the reserves are good. I'm a fan of reserves, but there needs to be maybe some math around how much you actually need, right? We don't grow them to the sky, right? We keep them. We try and make sure.
Usually the bond rating agencies tell you how much they like to see.
Okay. And do they count this 20 million when they're looking at Concord's bond rating agencies, or when they?
I don't know if I don't think I can get that level of detail on it, but generally they tell you what they like to see for levels of reserves.
Okay.
Okay, well, Alan, I think that brings you to a conclusion. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Oh, no problem.
Next time I'll have it for you.
No problem.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.
I'm sorry, Dean. There may be some public questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any attendees? I don't see any attendees with their hands in the air.
It's like the Q&A.
In the Q&A list, I do have a question. I have a question here from Matthew Johnson. Would you like to just speak to this rather than have me read it out? And please introduce yourself in the normal way for a hearing.
Sure. I'm Matt Johnson. I'm chair of the planning board, but I'm speaking on my behalf. but it actually is based upon that experience that I'm bringing this up, which is when, over a few times in the past few years, I've heard the wastewater capacity issue brought up as a kind of a break on some projects that have been proposed in town. And it does seem like a constraint that we should think about in terms of the overall opportunity cost benefit to the town rather than a single agency's budget. And we have a number of future projects, such as a transit-oriented development that's being proposed around Thoreau Depot. They're coming up over the next few years, and that's just one example. How can we evaluate and motivate the infrastructure investment that's needed to town's overall development goals? Should that be a finance committee responsibility because it's a holistic town capacity or capability rather than just, our sewer capacity? Because it just seems unfortunate that just that one constraint is driving the development or lack thereof in the town.
I can answer that.
Well, why don't you try?
Okay. Well, so that was my version of raising my hand, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's really fine.
So, Matt, the constraint on sewer is really around our permit from DEP. And so until they allow us to have more capacity, we're really restrained in what we can do. And so that's not really I don't, by my read, it's not a finance committee thing. It's the Public Works Commission and the town administration, but it's really a science matter, not a financial matter because of the permit. And Alan, I don't know if you want to expand upon that or make sure I have that right.
So I have a comment on that. Is that something for which we would normally have some sort of standing application to just get more capacity from the DEP, or do we periodically approach the DEP and say we'd like to expand? We're at X percentage capacity. We really are trying to manage this. How do we approach an expansion at that level?
There is a process. We've been negotiating with it's EPA and DEP, by the way. It's a joint permit. We're one of 3 states in the nation where we have 2 masters. But we've been seeking an increase in our permit for many, many years. The last application, you have to renew this permit. There's cycles. I can't remember if it's 5 or 7. I always get the water and wastewater, kind of mixed up. But the last application we submitted to EPA, we provided them with a lot of information demonstrating that we believe that we could increase the flow through our facility while maintaining the load, and the load is the pollutants. By removing pollutants from the flow, we'd be able to maintain our permit. And we did it with a capacity of under 10%, with an administrative process, something they should be able to entertain and approve. And it's been over a year since we've heard anything, from the regulators. EPA is very far behind on its, reissuance of permits. But I do believe that, the solution for Concord is going to be a combination of efficient spending on the wastewater side. What I tell people is I don't always want to do what we can get permitted to do because it's expensive and the environment doesn't benefit. But there's a system.
So, I think if I could just, to answer your question, it's not up to us to say we can, expand our capacity, and you would need to expand the plant to expand capacity because the load and the effluent and flow are all calculated by EPA and DEP. I think what Alan's saying is we're trying to recast how that's calculated so we could increase our capacity, which we believe we could manage without having to do a costly expansion to the plant. But as we sit here tonight, under the existing permit and rules, you would have to expand the plant, which is really expensive. Does Does that help?
That helps.
Yes, in an ideal world, we would be also trying to expand the public sewer capacity, extent to the public sewerage in town. So we weren't relying on septic for 2/3 of the properties in town. And again, maybe there is some way to really leap forward on this and make economic sense if we take the same attitude as when the system gets started.
I would just offer it has to make environmental sense first, then economic sense. And I think the community needs to come to grips with both of those things because they are at odds. And I think the community has both interests in mind, and it's a matter of getting the right balance.
I would just think we could make a better economic, both environmental and economic, case for public sewer compared to septic.
There is a debate that on-site disposal is environmentally preferable. I don't make it, but that's part of the challenge we have. We have to partner with the environmental groups, the watershed interests, and I don't disagree with the need. I can tell you it's just a challenge when there's competing interests. We just want to serve the public. I think we can do it. Maybe if we look at stormwater as well, we can probably find the right balance, but we got to get more creative than what we've been in the past. And it's not just Concord. This is a universal problem.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the public? I don't see any further questions, and I don't see any hands raised. So I think I can now say thank you, Alan, for your presentation.